Alright then, so let's have a crack at this, shall we? This is going to be my attempt of my initial tier listing for all these 9 leaders. So, as I mentioned at the start of this sort of set of videos, this is not very scientific, and this isn't intended to be scientific. This is my kind of guesstimate where I think people will find these will be, at least when the game first comes out. I strongly suspect that some of these will change a bit as time goes on, and as people get more familiar and sort of more different strategies and ideas kind of get thought of. I do expect some of these will change, and if/when there is an expansion to Uprising some point down the line, I suspect that will also tweak things as well. But this is going to be my guesstimate. I went and made this on tiermaker.com. I literally made this. This didn't exist. So if you guys want to have a crack at it, I would encourage. There'll be a link for it in the description below. Let's have a crack at this, shall we? And see how much I'm going to regret this in 3 months. So, I think I'm going to start with the ones that I feel reasonably confident in placing. I think the best place to start is probably going to be someone that I think is going to be real solid, middle ground, pretty dependable. And I'm going to start with Margot Fenring, and I'm going to put her up to an A tier. I think Margot's beauty and... pardon that. But I think her real potential in this game is that she is so simple and so straightforward, and there's nothing complicated about her. There's no real, like, crazy gimmicks or stuff you got to go out your way to do to benefit from her, that I think it's just going to make her nice and solid. I don't think Margot is ever going to be like a crazy remarkable leader by any stretch of imagination, but I think the fact that anyone can just pick her up and use her is great. I think the passive of just get two persuasion with the Bene Gesserit and get 2 spice is pretty decent. It's something you want to be doing anyways. I would also argue as well, like, just her signet ring, being able to put spies on those cities is going to be good for you. Whether it's good early because you're trying to hit Arrakeen, maybe going double drawing, making sure you get into the seats, you can get your mega hooks, or you put them down later on for research station, for those later game combats, and obviously those big draws and such. It's going to be good for you regardless. And obviously pairing Margot with some of the other cards in the game that give you access to spy locations, spy uses, stuff like Strike Fleet. There's a variant of that which involves just city space, that sort of thing. Those are great cards for Margot. And being able to guarantee those access to those sort of spaces is going to have some value. Don't get me wrong. It also does mean that as she generates spies for other reasons, be it espionage or from card effects, that sort of thing, there's a lot less pressure on Margot to feel she's got to put them on the general standard start of the board. You can tailor those specifically for, like, going for factions or maybe going for High Council or stuff like that. So I think it makes Margot a pretty solid leader and a good place, I think, to base the rest of this list off. I think a good person to put with her is going to be Feyd-Rautha. My feeling for Feyd-Rautha is that I don't think he's quite as good as Beast Raban. I think there's probably someone else in this game who's going to be a little bit more better suited to that sort of position. But again, I think Feyd is going to be really solid. Pretty easy to use. The ability to customize your rewards is definitely pretty decent. Being one of only a few leaders that can first action get a spy down immediately on your choice of board space is really strong. So it makes picking Feyd, like, even like in a first position, for example, pretty decent. Because half the time, your first action, you've got your ring, you go to wherever you want to go, Arrakeen or something, or even accept a contract, and you get a spy exactly where you want it, and being the first person to do that is really, really significant. His reveal effect of picking off those 2 swords, especially in the early game, is really good, and that is going to be really scary for people having to go against you. But I do think that is obviously going to fall off as the game goes on, and you're going to be wanting to use your spies. The only issue with Feyd, of course, is if you're using your spies constantly for those +2 swords, you're not using the spies for the other of reasonable things that you'd be doing with them, like getting to spaces, or drawing cards, or enabling card effects, or intrigues, and that sort of thing. So that is a little bit of a downside with Feyd, is that, like, if you're going to go with him, especially spy heavy, you're kind of committing yourself down to that, and it means that if you start getting intrigues or cards that want you to have spies around, that can make it a little bit difficult, and you don't really get to use Feyd's backup, his passive ability, very much. But still, I think pretty solid, and I don't think will ever be a bad pick in a game at all. going from Feyd, let's go for the other combat leader, which is going to be Gurney Halleck. And Gurney is going to be my first pick for putting up at the top end of the tree. I think Gurney is going to prove a very popular leader, a very straightforward leader to use, and people are going to get a deceptive amount of use out of him. I don't know if this is going to persist, however. I do think while Gurney, to start off with, is going to be like really heavily played a lot of the time because he's going to be pretty fun to use and pretty straightforward. I think as time goes and people develop different kind of ideas and strategy of other leaders, Gurney's position up here might start to struggle a little bit. I think there's definitely a chance I could revisit this in 6 months and say Gurney's like down here for sure. But I think early on when people are still learning and you want to have like as least complexity as possible going into it, because you've got to think, you've got to learn about all the new cards and new spaces, new paths you want to take, the way factions work, learning intrigues, that sort of thing. If you can have a nice, solid, straightforward leader, certainly to begin with, I think that's going to make life a lot easier in that respect. How much use you get out of his always smiling ability is perhaps a little bit variable, but it just promotes a really healthy gameplay style of kind of picking a bit, being aggressive, getting involved in fights, which is obviously a lot of fun, but not having to particularly compromise on your deck building quite as heavily. And it means like someone for Gurney going Arakeen with his Signet Ring, putting in 4 troops and drawing a card and getting the +1 persuasion back for it can be a really effective opening move for Gurney and stuff like that. So I think he'll definitely start off up here. Whether he retains that will have to remain to be seen, but if you're unsure who to pick and you've got a wide selection, Gurney Halleck, I don't think you'll go wrong. Let's go a little bit further down the list here. I think my first pick for a B choice is probably, and it slightly hurts me to do this, but I've got to be reasonable. I think I'm probably going to put Irulan for a B. I do think that she can be really super effective, and if used at the right time, and with specific cards in mind on the Imperium, I think she's very Imperium Rome-minded, because of the way her ring works. The ability to pull those 1 persuasion cards directly into your hand is a lot better than I think people give credit for. That can be really tricky. And it's about like getting those cheap cards and then trashing with Signet Ring definitely is a huge part of the game. Her Chronicler's Insight is such an important part of Irulan's game that if you get it wrong, it's really bad. But if you can get it right and get that spice going and have good uses for them, and that can pay for cards that need spice costs or extra effects, that sort of thing, Irulan can be very, very deadly. But I do think players are going to struggle with her a lot to begin with. Even though, like I say, I had the one game I played with You Got Franked and Co. and played her, and like I played unbelievably well. I just kept finding cool and creative moves with Irulan, and with using the ring and trashing and reacquiring and just keeping that cycling going. That's not something you're going to be able to consistently do. And I do think in the face of some of the other characters going, that Irulan, I think to start with, may not get chose a lot more. But I do rate her. I think that she can be very deadly. And my belief is Paul Denon, I think, agrees with that as well. I think he rates Irulan quite a lot. But in a more sort of competitive style, it's a real sink or swim with her. If you can get rolling and get some decent trash effects along with the +2 spice, you're going to be really, really good. I do think round 2 is really important for Irulan. I think it's very important. If you can try and get a way to pull her Signet Ring and a cheap card for you to trash and get that +2 spice round 2 straight away, I think that is a absolutely critical juncture for her. Round 3, I'd say as well, but round 2 especially is a massive round for Irulan. And that's something that players are going to have to definitely adapt to. But I think putting her here seems, I think, pretty reasonable. She's strong. She can do some really cool stuff, but it's definitely a lot of effort to get that out of it. And likewise, I'm going to include her old man, the old man, along with her, and put Emperor Shaddam also in the B tier. It's kind of crazy in a way, because I think that Shaddam probably has one of, if not the best rings in the entire game. I really do think that. Being able to get that passive generation of Solarian troops is solid, and later on spending free Solari for a random bump is really, really good. The problem comes down to Shaddam's passive ability and getting those 2 Sardaukar contracts put to the side. Now, you can't have it that he gets those contracts given to him immediately, because he would just shoot up there, basically, pretty much, I think. And I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to suggest, because that is pretty significant. The thing with Carino is that you've got to really commit to, if you're going to play as him, you've got two ways of doing it. You can just completely forego the Sardaukar stuff, and you can definitely do that, but then you're basically playing a leader that's got a really strong ring, and that's it. He has no passability whatsoever, effectively, and that's kind of hamstringing yourself. I think if you're going to go Carino, you've got to be prepared to get hold of at least the Sardaukar contract that gives you the recall agent and hit that Sardaukar spot. I think it's really important for Carino to do that. It's a nice way of getting a bump on a faction, and then still retain that agent. I think it's retaining that agent with the recall that is the significant part. The double card draw is nice and all, but I think the recall agent is by far the most important part of that. And then obviously using those troops to then get involved into like a mid-tier conflict, and ambushing someone basically who thinks they've got it kind of wrapped up and is kind of taking their foot off the gas a bit in a contract, and then all of a sudden your last action, Sardaukar, pull an agent back, and then just slam troops in, I think is significant. Also, I would argue with Shaddam, if you can get the card that lets you go to like Emperor spaces and deploy troops that you recruit on it, the coordination card, that is a massive, massive, massive part of the game plan, and I would definitely suggest that is a plan. But I do think people to start with are going to struggle with Carino. They're going to say he's got a good ring, but I just think a lot of people to start with are going to have those two contracts put aside, and they're just going to pick up different ones. And I don't think that's the best way to play him. I think over time, as people get more used to the game, I think you might actually see Carino jump up here. And I think this is where Shaddam will ultimately finish. But I think to begin with, I don't think he's going to be the most used as well. I think the fact that he's an optional leader as well with the Choam contracts, if you don't use any of that stuff, like you can't even use Carino because he obviously is inherent to that, means not everyone's going to get to experience him straight away, and definitely makes him one of the more complicated leaders going. Is that going to be worth it to start with? Maybe, maybe not. But I think there is definitely opportunity for Shaddam as people get more used to the game, and think of more cool moves and just get more experimental with stuff. I definitely think that he will see a bit more use. But to start with, I think that's probably about right. All right, then. So next up, let's do Matuli. It's a little bit of a difficult one to rate her because I do think, much like Shaddam, I think where people value her will change a bit. I think it depends a lot on who you are, who you're playing with, and how many months it's been since this video got uploaded, basically. It's really hard not to put her any more than, like, say, like a C, I think. While I do think that the criticism that Direwolf of some people have given it for Amber is, I think, a little bit ridiculous. I don't think there's no smoke without fire. And I would say that she doesn't strike me as a very exciting leader to play. And I think that is a bit of an issue. Her ring ability, I think, is actually pretty alright. But the problem is you've got to get that alliance to really make it, like, really significant. And getting alliances early in Uprising is kind of tough. There's a premium on faction access. There is a premium on making sure that you're not, getting those friendships. It's very much like the original Dune Imperium. One thing that people have not realized is that over the course of time, you think as the expansions have come in, there are so many ways to get faction stuff now. Shipping gave wild bumps at tier 2 shipping. Immortality gave, there's a bump on the Talaxu trap, which is fairly commonly taken. And you've got grafting, which just makes hitting factions so much easier. And there's a lot less penalties for doing so and like not playing other cards and stuff. So it's definitely very much a return back to what it used to be, I think, for Uprising. It is not uncommon to see people finishing 7-8 rounds of this game and not getting all the friendships. It's definitely not uncommon to see that. And the worlds of like trying to challenge 2 alliances, or having 2 alliances or more, are very difficult to achieve in this game. Doable if you get the right sort of deck, but you're very much dependent on what you find in the round, what you pick up. And of course, the issue with Amber is that if you go for that alliance early, you are making sacrifices elsewhere on the board. You know, if you're going spacing early, where you're never getting to Siege and you're never getting to Imperial Privilege. There is a card in the game that you can get which lets you ignore those influence requirements, and if you can get that as Amber, that is enormous. But there's only one of them, I think, in the game. And the odds of you picking that up as Amber are pretty unlikely. Unless maybe you take Amber in first position, figure you're going to reveal first, pick that up. That could be definitely a good way to play her. And when it comes to her reveal ability, which I actually do think is better than it looks, because it has different uses. You know, it can mitigate losses when things don't go well, but what it's trying to do, and I think that the art to Amber, is getting her to make people have to overcommit against her and draining away their combat resources, and then you then mitigate yours so you can then go kind of like and jump on the next conflict, basically. If you're playing a game where your opposition tend to have very depleted garrisons and don't have much left around, Amber can be great because you can just chuck in free troops, like at a city, for example, like at Arakeen, and know you're going to be pretty confident you can win, and then you're so far in front, you're basically telling people, don't bother trying to compete against me, and then they don't, you pull the troop back, and you get stuff for super cheap. That's kind of what you want to do with Amber, but obviously if it's a very heavily garrisoned game, people are getting worms a lot, that can be a bit of an issue for her, definitely. So I don't really want to put her up any higher. I think any lower is probably a little bit unfair. I do feel the banding of leaders is a lot tighter than it used to be. Like, the difference between, like, Gurney and Amber, I don't actually think is all that drastic, truthfully. But there's definitely, like, terms of people giving her a play and the experience and such, it's difficult to put her there. I do think that there are definitely worlds where Amber could, like, definitely creep up here. But I have to say, to start the game, I think she'll probably be, like, the least used leader out of the basic leaders, I would imagine. And that just is what it is. But I do think Amber can do some really, really cool stuff. It's just about a bit of nous and a bit of gamesmanship, really, against your opposition. So, the last three leaders are a little tricky to place, I think. There's definitely, I think, these three leaders here are the ones with the most variance. And what I mean by that is that I think there are some leaders in this game that potentially, are going to be pretty solid. Like Fenring, for example. The reason I put her straight into the A tier is because I think she's going to very firmly be there. If you play her, you're going to have probably a fairly solid, but maybe not particularly remarkable game. But you're generally going to feel kind of in it. You're going to be thereabouts. It's really hard to make mistakes of her. Whereas, for example, if you're playing like as Irulan, for example, you could definitely get yourself unstuck, and definitely someone like Staban. Like, if you go wrong with him, it's a complete catastrophe. But someone like her is going to be pretty solid. She's going to be at here or thereabouts. Whereas someone like Staban, like, we'll talk about him, but you could put him in probably like 4 different tiers here potentially, depending on how things go. And that's going to be where I'm kind of thinking a little bit for Muad'Dib, my boy Paul. This might get me a bit of stick, but I'm gonna put him in the A tier. I want to put him up here. I really do. But my prediction is that a lot of people think he's going to be up here, and especially when he gets played, Muad'Dib is the kind of leader that's really scary. And he's someone that I think people will very quickly recognize. If you just let him do whatever he wants, he will just start crushing the board. And I think what you'll see to begin with is when people pick Muad'Dib, especially in an early spot, there will be a lot of resistance to him. It's kind of very much in the way of what started happening with the Baron Harkonnen in Rise of X, for example. In Rise of X, Baron Harkonnen is probably the best leader in the entire game. But it got to a point where everyone kind of knew and realized that was the case. And so, like, people started playing back at him. Now, Baron was so good at X that it didn't particularly matter. But Muad'Dib, I think, is at risk of having a lot of people just constantly blocking him, preventing him from getting in worms. I think he is at risk of some early game weird card draw. Like, if you have a game in Muad'Dib where you don't draw your faction accesses or your signet ring, you've got a problem. And like for Muad'Dib, getting access to sandworms as soon as humanly possible is such a key part of his mechanic. But everyone knows it's a key part of his mechanic. That's one thing I like. I said I talked about with Irulan. I like about her is that like, she can kind of like react to how the board goes, kind of a bit like Paul Atreides of old. Paul Atreides of old was very kind of like, you react to the game situation, you keep yourself flexible, you give yourself options, and you kind of take it step by step. Whereas Muad'Dib here is very much, you feel like you've got to go Fremen twice, go siege, get worms in, and start doing that, which is very effective. And if you can get it to work, like, is a very successful strategy. But I think, like, and you saw it from the finals game, is that if the table just decide, nah, that don't work for me, brother, it can be really difficult for you to sustain that. Because if you're not getting sandworms into the fight, you cannot live on just the card draw from your Signet Ring from this leader. You've got to get those intrigues coming from worms. So, if left unchecked, he's up here, no question. But I think that he's probably going to settle about here for my liking. I think that if you get him rolling, he's going to feel great. He's going to be a lot of fun and really hard to play against. But I think in enough games, people are going to start like getting in his way a lot more than we've seen for any other leader ever in Dune Imperium. Justified or not, you can debate that. That's a totally separate question. But I just think that he's going to be probably stuck about here. Tons of potent energy and potential to do a lot of damage, but I think players are going to feel the need to get in his way a lot, and that's going to kind of hinder his strength. Now, how things will progress out, I don't know. Maybe this is just a bit of speculation, and it doesn't prove that way. This also comes from, Dune Imperium, where, and I talk about like the prisoner's dilemma a little bit, where we're in a world like with Ilban, for example, where it's obvious that you need to stop Ilban from making certain moves sometimes, but no one wants to do the move because it doesn't benefit themselves enough, and so waits for someone else to do it. Well, if you're going to Haga Basin to block Muad'Dib from getting his sandworms, obviously that's good because he's not getting his sandworms, but it's also good for you because you're getting your sandworms, and sandworms are really good. So I think that sort of situation is going to be a lot less common. People are going to be more happy to block him because, like, the only thing better than not having having Muad'Dib get his sandworms in is to get yours. And so there's a lot of value for getting those in. Because you think, well, even if I only get second place or even a third place, I'm still getting a half-decent reward for my trouble. So the opportunity cost doesn't seem very significant. Again, justified or not is debatable. So I'm going to put him at A tier. You may well disagree. You might think that he should be up there because of his inherent power. You might think he might be down here because you think everyone's just going to block him. I think putting him around like a solid A, like I'd probably put him like top of A tier and call it a day, I think is pretty reasonable. But I don't think, once people realize what's going on, I don't think he's going to be up there. I just don't think he's going to win enough games. But who knows? We'll see. Next up, let's do Lady Jessica. I've combined her into two for this. I was tempted to put both variants of her as separate entries, but I don't think that, you don't get one without the other. They're a complete package, so I decided just to retain it to one. Jessica is really tough to rank on this, because I do think that she can be really strong and really good, but it is very easy, I think, as Jessica, from my experiences, to not play her correctly, or, not look after what you're doing and not pay enough attention, and just completely fall apart. I think that she's got a lot of variance. And so for that reason, I'm going to put her as a B tier. I think these three are probably all about the same power level, really. It's all about the same. I guess maybe I'd put it like that, I guess. But it really doesn't particularly matter. As I said with Jessica, I think economy is really important for her. You've got to keep on top of it. If you run your resources dry and with no real prospect of getting any more particularly, you're going to find Jessica's not going to be a ton of fun to play with. Because she needs resources. She needs resources as spice early to get her memories going so that she can have a big middle round. And then you need resources late game so that you can use her Reverend Mother ability to get those double hits out of the board spaces, especially Espionage. I think Espionage is an absolutely crucial place for Lady Jessica to get to. And you've got to try and find a way to there as much as possible with some water to get those double hits. I think that is incredibly, incredibly important for her. So while I think that there's potentially a lot of fun with her, and I think she can have some really cool games, equally you can just run yourself into the ground and just completely fall apart. I would say that Jessica is going to take a lot of learning, and trying to judge when to make the flip from Jessica to the Reverend side, I think is very is going to be very important. But again, this is why I think like Jessica getting spies to the Bene Gesserit is so important, because it's such a big part of her game plan. You need to find a way to do that very, very quickly. Now, the problem is, of course, is Jessica has no way of accumulating spies early. So if you go against someone like, say, I don't know, like Feyd-Rautha or something, or Staban probably wouldn't do it, but Feyd-Rautha might. And Feyd-Rautha just decides, oh, I'm just going to personal train and just put a spy on Bene Gesserit. That's pretty sad for you, and that's going to probably have some impact. So I think Jessica has some risks. And I would say that, to me, I think Jessica might well be... Well, Jessica... well, probably like Muad'Dib and probably Staban are the leaders that could definitely be kind of targeted against with particular types of moves that really hurt them. Maybe Jessica not as obviously so as like Muad'Dib, obviously just blocking worms, but I think she's definitely a candidate to be a victim of some of that. So I think you've got to be really, really careful with her. But if you can keep yourself on top of resources, if you can get that access to espionage, and if you can make a significant purchase with that memory split, be it a Spicemas flow point or like a decent 6 or 7 coster, and get that in your game, like Long Live the Fighters maybe, or Steersman, or some of those real high cost cards, if you can pick those up with your memory flip, that is an incredibly important. So very important to pay attention with her. And you've got to pick the right moment to make the right moves, and it is absolutely crucial for her, which is why I think a lot of people are going to struggle to get a lot out of her. But I do think the skill cap is there to have a lot of good use. But I think probably round B seems pretty good for her. She might well creep up gradually as people learn the game more and kind of get a better feel for that timing. But I think a decent B tier seems pretty good to me. And then lastly, we have Staban. It's super tough for me to rate Staban because I never played him. I didn't get the chance to, and I only went against him once or maybe twice. So my experience with Staban is incredibly limited. So I'm kind of left at theory crafting and things that other people have said. Staban, without a question, has the greatest degree of variance on this sort of list. Like, he could be up here, you play him well, or you could just completely mismanage him and he's down here. Like, legitimately, if you don't pick him at the right time, that can definitely happen. But I think for me, I'm gonna go ahead and put Staban up here, because I really think that Staban is going to be the leader that only gets picked when it really suits him. And what I mean by that is, at the moment with with Dune Imperium, is there are certain leaders that are very good when picked situationally, but aren't very good when they're not picked for stuff that suits them. So an example would be Ariana, for example. She's a pretty weak leader, truth be told. But if you pick her knowing you're going to get hold of, say, Saidina, like, if you knew you were going to get Saidina when you play Ariana, she's suddenly so much better. Alazer Kaz is probably a better example of a leader that, generally speaking, she's difficult to use. It's hard for her to commit properly to get decent resources. And her strengths are, a little bit limited. But if you can get hold of a couple of good graph cards as a Lasery Kaz with Immortality and such, she is such a strong, much better leader, because the grafting gives you consistent spice generation, and you can purchase fold space cards to graft that too, and suddenly the downsides of putting a card down and having to predict what's going on doesn't matter anymore, and you can basically play whatever you want, whenever you want, and you're just constantly accruing resources every single round, and it gets past her real big stumbling block, makes her so much easier to use. Staban is going to be very similar to that. Staban, if you just pick him on any random game, could be struggling, because losing your diplomacy card is so painful. I can't emphasize how bad that potentially is. But if you can pick up a couple of these, if you pick him for a row where there's a decent spy card or two out there's some faction cards out there, if it's populated with that sort of stuff, and you can buy one or two of those as Staban, you get past that major downside, and what you're left with is a leader with kind of a weird-looking deck, but still pretty usable. You still want to get rid of a couple of those starter cards you're seeing these buys sooner, and technically speaking, the cards that you do buy, you will see slightly more frequently than with other leaders because there's just less cards in your deck, so you're going to see them more often, which is kind of a cool effect. And yeah, you're left with a leader that's got a kind of a weird deck, but you're seeing those cards more often. You got a passive, which if you put the spy, especially at Haga Basin, you're going to pick up some spies over the course of the game, especially depending on certain types of leaders that might get themselves involved in the combat a lot, like Gurney, Muad'Dib, Feyd. They will be hitting that space all the damn time. And a Signet Ring that's possibly the best in the game, and gives you buckets of flexibility, gives you lots of reasons to use your resources and customize them as you need to, and you're going to get a ton of value out of that. So that's what I'd say to the Staban, is as long as you pick him sensibly, and once you play him, the first couple of games to Staban, I suspect, will be rough, but Staban, when used correctly by a good player, I think is definitely up there. And I think the thing that goes well for Staban is that although he's a difficult leader to use, definitely, he strikes me as a very rewarding leader. You know, like if you get through a game and you play it really well and you're getting those factions and you're getting alliances with Staban with no diplomacy, it seems completely absurd. But you can say, you know, I played a really good game, and you probably deserve the win. So Staban, super high risk. And is going to definitely require a bit of skill and nous, but when you get him right, he's definitely going to be up there, definitely. Could potentially put him here, but having Gurney up top seems a bit silly. So for me, I'm putting Staban up top. So that is going to be my initial tier listing for the leaders. As I said, this is far from scientific. This is just my gut instinct for what I think players will see. I mean, I look at it, and to me, I don't see anything particularly ridiculous. I think it's a fairly solid guess of where things will go. But I think a lot of it is going to come down to personal preference and how you want to play the game. Like, you don't have to get Sandworms to win Dune Imperium Uprising by any stretch of imagination. You know, the game I played with Irulan against Frank and such, like, I was fighting Sandworms, but I never got any myself. Never got a hook, Maker Hook. I definitely found in quite a few of my games I wasn't getting Maker Hooks, and I was still winning a few of them, even without that. But I would definitely say that you probably need to get a Sandworm in some or another. Just that ability to get that double conflict reward, that can absolutely accelerate you through a game. It can be super damn huge. But I think this is a pretty solid way to look at it. I will put, again, there's a link to this tier maker in the description below, and I'm definitely curious to see what you guys make of the list, whether you have the sort of same ideas. And I do expect that when I revisit this, say like 6 months down the line, and I think where leaders stand, I suspect this will probably look a little bit different, but this is my guess for how things will look to begin with. And it's not to say that you shouldn't use, you know, Amber or Jessica or all these sort of things. I do think the banding between S and C here is pretty tight. I don't think there's a ton about it. There's definitely some leader abilities I think inherently are going to be pretty solid. But I think a lot more of the game is going to come down to the decision-making that you take, the cards you decide to go for, when you decide to make certain trips to factions, and just your creativity in the game on the board itself. I think makes a big difference. I do think certainly we're in a bit of a phase at the moment where the strength of the leader is having a pretty significant impact on sort of their success. I don't think there's going to be as much of a thing in Uprising. I think as a whole, the leaders kind of have been maybe toned down just a little bit. And that's not a bad thing at all. You know, it gives players a lot more skill expression on the actual board itself and the choices and decisions they make, which I think has got to be the way to go forward. So, yeah, that's going to be it. So I'm going to end this video. I've been going at this for 3 hours. I've covered a lot of ground over this, and I've got a lot of editing to do. But super curious to see what you guys make of this. And regardless, I do hope you guys will enjoy Uprising. We'll obviously be covering it tons when it comes out, which will be obviously fairly soon. A reminder that it's still open for pre-order for the Direwolf Saw. And also a reminder that you can go to Leonardo Hotels, formerly Jury's Inn in Edinburgh. Isn't that wonderful? Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you soon.